Welcome to Expert Opinion, the branding business forum where leaders share their views, insights, and experiences from the world of B2B branding. And now, here's your host.
Welcome to Expert Opinion. I'm Ryan Rieches, and today's show is focused on how a brand is perceived and valued during the merger and acquisition process. Today's guest is Rob Follows, founder and CEO of STS Capital Partners, an international investment banking firm that focuses on sell-side transactions. So if you ever plan to sell your business, you might want to listen to the insights that Rob will share with us today. Rob, welcome to Expert Opinion.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.
Well, Rob, I was thinking that a great way to start our conversation today would be to maybe tell your story of the marketing firm that you had, that you ultimately sold, and how it kind of launched you into this world of investment banking.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I was fortunate enough to start, as many entrepreneurs do, our business very early in life. I remember when I was younger, people would say in my 20s when we were going after large international contracts, where's your dad? Your dad owns the business, right? And I'd say, yeah, he's here, but I'm the president. So if you just give me the account, we'll be fine. And of course, my dad wasn't involved in the business at all. I was just very, very young. When I was 29, the North American Free Trade Agreement came in. I was originally doing business in Canada, and that opened up the question of what will happen in the future in marketing services in North America. At that time, there was below-the-line and above-the-line marketing services. Above-the-line being pull, creating demand through television commercials, and below-the-line being push, and that is what we see now through what's now the Internet marketing protocols. And so when NAFTA opened, the larger group in St. Louis and Minneapolis, Merritt's Inc. out of St. Louis being one of the largest in below-the-line marketing services at the time with several $billion in sales, made an offer on our business that we could not refuse. And so the background we have in marketing really did become one of the pillars of understanding how businesses can be positioned for a fantastic valuation in direct sale to strategic buyers.
Do you mind sharing a little detail about that sale and kind of what the multiple you got?
Absolutely. We received a 27 times EBITDA multiple, which sounds very high, but one of the learnings for me, it was my first shocking learning, was when I became responsible for the international divisions of Merritt's many years later, globally, outside the United States, and therefore in approving and budgeting for acquisitions, I looked at my own file and realized that it was a low multiple relative to the problem it was solving for the buyer. And that was the second principle that became very, very important to us in starting STS Capital Partners, and that was understanding that it's actually the value of your transaction to the buyer that drives the ultimate enterprise value, not a multiple of EBITDA. And so if a buyer, which you've done many transactions and set many valuation records in many industries to date now, if a buyer, any one of those buyers, is going to make 100 times EBITDA in their own terms as the business integrated into their business, then you have the option of getting, in that scenario, or logical multiple would be 50 times EBITDA, splitting it with them. But the hard part and the real art and the real discipline is understanding what a buyer will value your business at. And in the case of Merritt's and AIM, my firm, I had no idea what the buyer was looking for, and that's what a really great M&A advisor can provide you with.
Well, this aligns with the topic I know you and I have talked about many times, and that is focusing on a strategic buyer as opposed to a financial buyer. So Can you talk a little bit about that process that you would advise your clients to look into in regards to finding a number of strategic buyers that could be considered?
Absolutely. The difference between, when you talk about strategic buyers, it's juxtaposing it and comparing it to financial buyers. So financial buyers are, they've changed names over the decades, but merchant banks or venture capitalists, a few decades ago, and now private equity is the current best name for and most commonly used name for financial buyers. Those buyers are trying to buy businesses as cheap as they can. So think about their position here: buy businesses as cheap as they can, so at the lowest possible purchase price, so they can sell them to strategic buyers down the road. And that is, they resell them to the end user, as it were. And so what we're interested in helping clients do, and if clients ever want to try doing it on their own, they can try doing that, and that is understanding who the private equity guys would sell to. Who is the strategic ultimate buyer? Because they are middlemen. And if you can take the time to understand who they are, work with your M&A advisor, that actually is committed, who's not working with private equity at all. That's very, very important because there's many conflicts there, but it's actually positioning clients directly with strategic investors. And if you can work with somebody that does that and understand who would be able to make more money owning your firm than you do, that's the first step in defining who would be a strategic buyer. And if you look at international buyers first, those are ones that actually value the whole market that they're stepping into. If it's in the United States, for instance, and they're coming from Japan, or they're coming from the Nordics, or they're coming from Canada, or from China, as an example, as some examples, or India, those buyers value stepping into the U.S. market as part of the transaction, therefore will pay more than a multiple just for your firm. So in summary, strategic buyers are those that the private equity and other financial buyers are going to sell to. They're ones that will make more money owning your business than you will as the shareholder, and they're ones that see other value in, which I can go deeper into, but in owning your business than you can create owning it yourself. And therefore they're strategic by definition, and therefore your transaction strategic to them, because it'll move the needle of performance considerably inside their organization, and these are large corporates usually, and they will give you better terms and conditions, which are very important, and help support even your own vision going forward if you can find several and run what we call a soft auction between them.
Okay, so to kind of summarize there, consider and find the right type of strategic buyers that could be the ultimate result, and then work with you early on to help identify those organizations, and then by identifying them, have a better understanding of the type of value that they would pay based upon your competitive advantage, or what you actually offer the buyer, and the result that you would ultimately give them. So how early should a company consider developing that brand positioning or that competitive advantage in order to really take the time to implement a brand that has an increased value?
Well, that's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. As early as possible. I heard someone say, a teacher say to a group that it was being facilitated, that the time to start that was the best time to start that was 20 years ago for the group he was talking to, but the next best time is today. And so starting immediately to think about your brand and your positioning in terms of how strategics will see you, and most importantly, understanding what a strategic buyer will value in your business, and positioning that as part of your brand and part of your value proposition is critical as soon as possible. So if the transaction might be 2 years down the road, then it's not too late. If it's 3 or 4 years down the road, when you're planning to exit, you have lots of time to implement it. Even if it's only going to be a year down the road, there's lots of improvement to brand positioning that can drive more value in a transaction.
Is there any way to put a value on the brand as you go through the process and ultimately are in the kind of the boardroom of negotiations? Well,
brand is incredibly valuable in all cases, and so putting a price tag on it depends on. So the higher value will be placed on the business by a strategic based on how much money they're going to make with it. So if your brand is strong enough, for instance, that your product can be sold through their international distribution channels, and it's bringing another brand to their portfolio, that will drive incredible value, as an example. If in the inverse, your brand is strong enough that an international group comes in under your brand with products and services that they could offer, then that's also highly leverageable. So it does very much depend on, the value is dependent on the ability to execute, and that's dependent on the strength of the brand and the positioning. And so it is dependent specifically on, in each individual case, who the buyer is, but in all cases, strengthening your brand and your positioning and your value proposition and understanding early on what strategics might value will drive multiples up.
Yeah, we work primarily in the area of B2B, and most people think that buyers and decision makers in the world of B2B are all rationally based, but it's quite the opposite. It's very emotional in terms of who and how a decision is made. Longer sales cycles, considered purchase, multiple decision makers, somebody's job's on the line. So it's very much an emotional connection, and I think the same thing applies to even valuation. If you take a look at the average S&P company, the value is 84% intellectual and only 16% tangible. And so what a significant attribute towards the emotional connection of, as you mentioned, the future ability to perform. And that's an emotional decision there, an emotional connection, not a rational one. Any thoughts there?
Oh, absolutely. And so you've really hit the nail on the head. The analogy we like to use is falling in love. And so these large corporate groups boil down to one or two executives, and one executive taking the lead on an acquisition that's strategic. And as you say, putting his name out on the line, because he's saying to the executive committee, the board, or the management committee, that that person or she increasingly will own that acquisition. And so their name is on it as soon as they advocate it. So there's the pre-advocation point, in which case they need to be falling in love with your business, and they're going to be, just as in that is in the analogy of dating, as they're falling in love and getting close to being totally committed, and that is going into the boardroom and saying, we're going to do this and I'm going to own it, and pushing the CFO and pushing the CMO and pushing the balance of the board to agree. They're both in a process of falling in love as well as in a process of making sure they're not making a mistake. Because once they cross that line and they put their name on it, it is a career-limiting move to have a disastrous M&A transaction. So having a really strong brand, really clear positioning, B2B, is critical in helping the strategic buyer understand exactly where the fit is and to fall in love with your business such that they will put their name on the line. They'll advocate it inside the corporation, and as they fall more and more in love, then price doesn't become the issue. It becomes a matter of how much synergies they're going to get, and then how much financially is going to be paid. And as you think about it, amortized over time, and even more importantly, this isn't an entrepreneur. It isn't their capital. It's corporate capital. So they're looking at their personal capital as a leader, being challenged if they make a mistake, and they're not worried about the actual dollars. They're worried about success. And the more clarity you can bring to what the brand positioning is, what the value proposition is, the more comfortable they'll be in letting themselves fall in love with the business such that price doesn't matter. Just before we came on the call, and this is a process, just before I came on the call with you, which we really appreciate taking the time for, we were coaching a group. They've had 3 meetings with a strategic buyer, and now they're inviting them down to Utah where the headquarters are. It's an international seller and one potential buyer in Utah, and they're inviting them down. And our coaching to them was bring all the middle management down to meet the middle management of the group based in Utah, so that they will fall in love and come to understand clearly the synergies that will be created and the value that will be created, and no discussion of price, no discussion of structure, so that process of understanding how they're positioned and how the synergies will be developed drives the emotional component up, such that the pricing rationale drops in importance. So it's critical.
Well, Rob, you've shared the benefits of looking at your brand years before you would position it and sell it to a strategic buyer, whether that 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. I think people can get their head around that, and we certainly get hired to do a lot of that type of work. But another area that is growing for us is that we're most oftenly brought in after a transaction is complete. So they've made the business deal, and then they realize that the next big challenge is to unite the cultures and create a value proposition for the marketplace. So they both internal and external branding, and this idea of internal alignment and getting the teams all connected. Because it's a fact that the reason most mergers don't work is because they don't have cultural alignment. They didn't pay enough attention to it, and a lot of times an internal brand with clarity around the purpose, vision, and mission, and then what we stand for collectively together can do a great job uniting that organization and pulling it forward. Can you share your thoughts around that topic as well?
Absolutely, and it's so saddening for me to hear the stats on the amount of mergers that fail because of exactly what you're bringing clarity to, and that is a united team that has a clear vision, clear mission, clear values, clear understanding of how they're measured and what the internal support that each department and every new position that people are taking on in the merged organization can contribute to. I mean, that is absolutely critical, and I applaud the work that your firm is doing because it's so important. And not enough people spend the time and the money and the resources on it, and that is one of the contributors to failed mergers from the strategic standpoint. And so I just, again, applaud the work that you're doing and encourage more buyers to think very long-term about that investment.
As you advise your clients on the strategic sell, what do you tell them in the area of brand positioning and how to present the company so that it is perceived to be an expert, if you will? So it increases that value based upon the relative benefit that the organization gives in terms of, can the organization stand for one thing and then position it accordingly so that it's perceived to be the leader in that area, whether it's a thought leader or market leader, or give us a perspective on how positioning and if in some ways sacrifice can also lead to a greater valuation and multiple.
Sure, thank you. So I think it breaks down into two answers there. One is acquisition, pre-merger, and in that case, as we've been discussing, being really clear on the brand, on the positioning, brings, as we've discussed already, increased valuation because there's increased clarity on the synergy, so it brings increased valuation multiples because the aggregate value actually doesn't then work off multiples, but actually the percentage of the deal you can negotiate to be your price as against what they're going to put together as they understand clearly how they're bringing your business into theirs. So that's the first piece that we've talked about already, which is critical from the seller's standpoint, to be really clear. On the second piece, in my own case and in many others entrepreneurs' cases, and I don't know how many entrepreneurs percentage-wise become corporate hired guns effectively or not, but I can actually see that from both perspectives. And so post-integration, post-M&A transaction, whether you're looking at it from one side or the other, the integration of and clarity on bringing together the strength of the acquired company and integrating it into the acquiring company, and then coming out to the marketplace with a really clear and concise positioning and communication of what the strength is of the business and how clients and both clients externally and employees internally can benefit from that is I think the number one driver of success in integration of acquisitions. And so I think it's critically important. And I think the branding industry would do a good job for themselves and a great service if they would find a way to get large corporates to understand that this is critical and it's a huge opportunity. And again, I just want to compliment the work you're doing. I know you haven't asked me to do that, but I'm complimenting the work that you're doing because it is so important on the integration side, which is the second piece.
Well, thank you, Rob. It's very rewarding work as well to see the culture come together and be united, and quickly the results start happening. As one of our clients says, if you take care of the employees will take care of the customers, and the customers will take care of the shareholders. So it is in that order. And to give people the direction through these core statements of purpose, vision, mission, and really uniting a culture can be financially very effective. So we're almost out of time, but I'd like to have you just tell one final story, if you wouldn't mind. I know you've climbed the 7 summits, and you use Everest as a metaphor of thinking big. As it relates to advice you could give people, our listeners today, on thinking big as it relates to selling their business, any final thoughts there?
I thank you for asking. I think that visioning is critically important, and it requires quiet reflection and time away from, as Stephen Covey would have said, quadrant 1, busy, urgent, crisis activities, and taking time in quadrant 2, as he would lay out in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, on taking time away to do planning and visioning really on a crystal clear basis the kind of exit transaction that you would like, and not let your limiting beliefs, we all have limiting beliefs in our subconscious, not letting your limiting beliefs limit you. Work with a professional like STS Capital Partners or someone like that has lots of experience in setting valuation records, and create a vision that's crystal clear for you and all the stakeholders on the kind of exit that would be an absolute huge home run. And actually think about hitting it out of the stadium, for getting a home run analogy, and taking it to the next level. As you will know from different relationships we have that overlap, we've been able to help people sell at many, many, many multiples of what they've hoped for. But they had to buy into the vision first. And so I think having the time, taking the time to envision what a perfect outcome would be for you as a first step, and then working with somebody that is a professional in the area as a second step would be really helpful for people to start to come to terms with an exit as being a really big moment in their life that creates the time, treasure, and talent to do things that might be considered potentially more significant in their life. And so Success to Significance is one of STS's brands, and the other is through selling to strategics. And so thinking about it that way that would support people, and the last thing I'll say is achieving their own summits. If you can set a really big goal and understand that a strategic M&A transaction from the sell side can help you get there, I think is the start to walking down the road towards very successful exits. And understanding that one of the key steps on that path and on that climb is to get crystal clear on your value proposition through strong branding is really important.
Well, great words of advice there, Rob. Thank you. Well, we are out of time. Thank you for being a guest on Expert Opinion. Would you mind sharing your email address in case any listeners would like to get a hold of you?
Oh, absolutely, and thank you for asking. I have a very simple email address. It's Rob, R-O-B, at STS, Success to Significance, STScapital.com. Rob at STScapital.com.
Perfect. Thanks again, Rob. That concludes our show for today. This is Ryan Rieches, and you've been listening to another edition of Expert Opinion, a branding business forum where thought leaders share their point of view. If you'd like to listen to past shows or read our blog series, visit BrandingBusiness.com. And until our next show, grow your business by living your brand promise.